All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Steve Anderson. I'm here with Samantha Dallaire, and we're going to talk about Business Central Payables Management. So we're going to go through a session here where we're going to hit the basics on purchasing and payments and things like that within Business Central. We got some housekeeping things that we need to take care of as we get into this, because this is for CPE credit. And so this kind of just gives documentation of what we're covering here, program length, et cetera. And we may record, I think we are recording this. There will be um, polling and quiz at the end, which is another CPE requirement that we will follow, and that'll be documented in case there's any questions on that. And so this is our agenda here. We'll try to squeeze it in. It might take a little longer than 60 minutes, but we'll try to get through it. There will be some areas here that we'll jump into that uh, we will not necessarily dive in very deeply. I'm going to mention a few things that are more advanced, or like just make sure that that you know that those exist in Business Central, but they could be helpful for future knowledge. Again, this is really focused on the payables area, payables and purchasing area of BC. But obviously, as we go through this, we'll be mentioning things like, there's a relationship to the chart of accounts, relationship to other setups and security and things like that that we will get into as we go through this. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. So I just want to talk first about how Business Central fits into the rest of the Microsoft world, and then just some things that are not payables related, but they're important to know. They're important to have kind of a foundation, and also just from an accountant's point of view, good to know better use of the system and some accounting controls. So I'm going to go through just a few of those type of things. So this slide tells us, at least from my point of view, doing Business Central, where Business Central fits into the Microsoft world. And so it is, like I said, from my point of view, it's in the middle. Maybe not for everybody, but it's a cloud product. It fits in with Teams, with Office 365, with lots of other applications, everything Microsoft. And so if you're using that in that way, it fits into that world. I know there could be some customers that maybe are on the older on-premise versions, but this is the cloud version that lives inside the Microsoft environment. Okay, and we can tailor the use of Business Central for payables people, and sometimes there's cross functionality, but for payables people in particular, they're going to want this page to be tailored to what they do. And see, we can come in here and make it more specific. Like you see, there's a link here in the purchase invoice, and there's purchase orders and different things. Again, today it'll be more payables, but we can tailor this view to match how you're going to live in things. And by the way, I am going to switch to the real product, but it'll save a little time here if we go through some screenshots, and then we'll get into the real product here in just a few minutes. Okay, Copilot, you can't go too far in the Microsoft world without talking about Copilot, but again, it is important to understand educationally as far as the system's concerned, in that there's good use of Copilot to help you ask questions, get help. How do I process a payment? How do I enter an invoice? So I've kind of highlighted some of the ones that might be more payables related. And so that first one was the chat. There's some e-document, which is a more advanced feature, but it has to do with the potential for bringing electronic documents into your payables process. Analyzing a list could be anything from analyzing transaction to analyzing vendor balances. There's some advanced ways to do that, and Copilot can help you with that, make it a little faster. And then the payables agent. This is, again, a more advanced topic, but it would allow AI to help you with AP automation. And so it's a way to let things flow through the system, and you're still in control because the agent and Copilot is supposed to help you, not take the lead. But that's an advanced function that could be related to payables that you might want to keep in back of your mind for future use. And I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just on those different topics. So the Copilot chat over on the left-hand side, I said, show me the purchase invoices due. That's a pretty simplistic way to say it. Obviously, we need to be good at our prompts, but I did get a return that said, oh, here's some 3 invoices that are due. And over on the right, I asked it to analyze that list for me, group them by vendors. So I have a quick view that, I was able to go in and just ask sort of a plain language question, get a list of invoices, and then analyze those like a pivot table, so to speak, inside BC. And then this is a graphic on the how the agent works at a very high level. I don't want to go through the details, but this is what's important to take away on here is, again, that it's working. It can help you with processing payments in an AP automation world. And again, if this is of interest, you want to keep that in mind. It's going to be a good way in the future to accelerate the process. All right, and then accounting controls are important. There's a couple of ways to look at, actually there's several ways to look at this. One is profiles. So over on the left, when we set up BC, if you have people using BC in your company, if they are AP exclusively, they might have a role like AP coordinator, and there's some other roles that are AP centric. I know sometimes we all kind of overlap our different roles, so you have to maybe change that. But the first thing you can do is assign a role, and that helps to control what do I see. It doesn't add security yet, but it says what can I see on my pages. So very AP centric. And then the right hand side is literal permissions that say this is going to help me control that the payables person is not, say, for example, not going in and doing bank rec, or the payables person is not doing sales. So there's more firm permission sets that help you with your controls that come in place through the permissions itself. And then the change log is another important aspect here. And again, this of course doesn't just apply to payables, this applies to everything. But we can turn on change logs. And it's what we recommend is selectively turning those on for things like change to a vendor, change to a setup. But in payables in particular, you may want to have most of the aspects of like new vendor being set up, or changing vendor's bank account, or changing a vendor's address, all those important internal controls that you want to have in place. The system will track those, log those for you. Auditors sometimes ask to see those reports, so those can be important. As long as you're only checking on sort of the setup type changes and not transactional changes, it doesn't take a lot of doesn't put a lot of effort or work into the system. And then the bottom part about workflows, there are some specific workflows for payables and purchasing, and they're optional. And again, that's more of an advanced topic, but just know that you can turn on and set up out of the box vendor workflow. So approving a vendor, having it routed to the appropriate people. Same thing with invoices, purchase orders, other aspects, and journals and things. But these are the two that are most commonly used when we're talking about accounting controls for payables. Okay, so now we'll get into more of the detail, and I'll start flipping back and forth a little bit between my PowerPoint here and Business Central. So we'll kind of go through the vendor management of these different topics about what's important when you're basically, think of this as what are the important things that I need to do when I'm setting up vendors. So let me flip back over here to my Business Central. Okay, here we go. So this is my home page. I mentioned that earlier. I'm going to kind of hide some things. And again, this is a tailored view for whatever I'm doing. I'm going to go right into the vendor screen. Initially, I get this vendor list, right? So this is a filtered list. I'm sure if you're familiar at all with BC, you know a lot of things are list page driven. The list can be sorted, changed, and filtered. We won't get too much into that here, but the important thing is, this is your list of vendors with different attributes that you have on them. I'm going to open up an existing one. If you were creating a new one, there's a plus button, and there's some rules for creating new ones that'll help you. But I want to just kind of focus on some of the areas of what's important when you're setting up the vendor. And again, there's going to be some of these that are more common, and some of them are less common. But obviously, you've got your primary information. The system can auto number, but a lot of people have their own numbering system. So you got your name and address type information you see in the middle section here that you can handle. The invoicing section is very important on some posting groups. And so posting groups help determine where on the GL account side of things do accounts flow to. So when transactions come through on invoices or other things, credits and things, there's posting groups that control how those happen. So those should already be set for you. So, what I'm explaining here is kind of make sure these get assigned. When the system is set up for you, it should be in such a way that when you create a new vendor, some of these fields populate. So for example, these posting groups should populate for us. And so if we use vendor templates, So that's kind of a recommendation to make sure the templates are coming through. That'll help set some default values that you want consistency and standardize the way you're setting up the system. So that's an important one, of course. Payment terms, of course, important, and payment methods, and then the 1099 fields. And I'll note this in the slide deck too. We're not really going to go through the 1099 process. I know this is the time of year everybody's dealing with that. We do have a separate webinar and separate documentation on like what are all the processes you go through, but these are just a few of the fields. There's a lot of background on how these work. When you set it up properly, and you set your vendor up properly to handle 1099, then when you're doing transactions, that data is going to get collected properly, and then at the end of the year, you'll be able to do your reporting, review, corrections, whatever you need to do to get your 1099s filed. The important thing is as you're setting them up to make sure that there's additional steps that you do to assign information for the 1099. Again, not going to go into that here, but obviously that's a critical thing that needs to happen. There's a few more fields depending on how you're using. Like, if, for example, if you were using electronic payments like EFT, there are bank account settings, and so I have on here like my Wells Fargo setup that tells me some bank account info that's masked, and whether I use this for electronic payments or not. So there's a little toggle here for that. There's obviously some work that happens when you're setting up the EFT process and the positive pay process in the system, but Business Central can handle that for you for most banks out of the box. So that's an important one that sometimes comes up. Another important one to kind of keep in mind is kind of in the contact and the email area. There's a couple of places where you're going to see that. There's an email on this front page that can be used if there's a scenario where you're wanting to email out, maybe not just remittance, but maybe there's purchase orders and remittances. This is a page right here, this document layout page is important if there are different email addresses for different scenarios and how those should go and what reports should get emailed and things like that. I see the poll has just come up. So this is part of our polling here. I'm just going to click off the answer here and we'll continue on, but everybody should go in and select that for us to keep going. Care of that on my side. Okay, so that's important to know on what's happening there. And then just a couple more. Let's see if I got the payment, I got the receiving. Let me flip back over to my document to make sure I'm not missing anything. I talked about the posting. Oh, let's talk about the remittance. The remittance is also an important one that is, sometimes I don't remember where this one is at. There is a, let me look at my screenshot. There's a different place for this. This is an important one. If I know there's scenarios where, here it is. It's under the related vendor remit to address. So there's scenarios where sometimes, as you know, purchase order or buying side goes to one place, the payments maybe go to a lockbox, that kind of situation. So there's a place to go in and enter that, and that can be used in the payment process, of course. So that can be an important one. Let me just flip back and make sure I didn't miss anything else. The contacts kind of relates to the address setup and things. Okay, I think we got most of those. Yeah, we got those covered. When I mentioned the payment terms and methods, of course, the system defaults those. So in your company setup, someone should be controlling that. There shouldn't be scenarios where something is being done new. And just again, from a kind of a control point of view, if someone is trying to add something that doesn't exist, right? So I can, if I'm working off this list, this is going to validate. So as you can imagine, many of these fields are going to do validation, which is another good control, and have things locked down so that I'm not allowed to go change this, or I'm not allowed to use something that's not preset in the system. So those are important controls there. Okay, let me jump back over. All right, so I think we got through these. Let me just tab through these or run through these again. Get to our next section. The posting groups, like I said, has to do with getting to the right balance sheet, AP account, and other things. 1099 fields that I'm going to mention here. It's important to know that there's a separate process. It's also super important to be checking, especially this time of year, but also as you go forward. Microsoft makes updates. They made some pretty major updates in the latest version. Don't know if that's going to continue. We kind of hope it doesn't continue, but we're also at the mercy of what the IRS does. So there could be changes. You want to be checking your documentation and checking with your partner on or your admins on make sure how that is set up. Okay, we got through the bank accounts, we got through the email. All right, so let's get into more the transactional side of this. And let's kind of just like I said, we're not going to hit all of them in a lot of detail, but let's talk about what we can get through here. So we have in some systems, it's called payables, payables invoices. We call it purchase invoices. It's just really paying the bill, right? Or actually not paying the bill yet, but entering the bill to be paid. So we have those exist first, of course, as I enter them. They're not posted yet. Someone's reviewing them. And then I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to get invoices into the system and the GL account distributions and how you would go through and fill out your invoice is going to be. How to do attachments and comments, and then of course you want to post these things. So let's go through a couple of screenshots and then we'll do it for real. So there's always going to be a list of anything in the unposted, they call it purchase invoices, and I'll show you the distinction in the system between posted and not posted. But in the purchase invoices, different views of this, but the primary thing is this is a list of invoices that have not been posted yet. Right. So it's important at year-end or month-end closing in particular, just maybe even before each check run, to go through and make sure, are we clear? Are we caught up? There's ways to kind of, automate some posting, but we wouldn't recommend that. Really, you want to do a thorough review, make sure it's an understanding of why these things are out there if they haven't been posted yet. Okay. And then having a way to get the new invoices in, I'll show you this in the system. On the left-hand side, I'm just saying there's a manual entry. Of course, that just means I go to the invoice screen. I'm going to start entering a vendor. I'm going to enter lines. I'm going to enter dates. I'm going to do things like that. I'm just going to manually do it. There are some other options. And another option would be, let's say that it was utilities or it was something repetitive or it was something that is just, something I want to copy from last time. So there's a function in here when you go to actions and functions to copy your from a prior document. So like this bottom part that says copy purchase document, I can go in and say, oh, I want to copy from an invoice that I did last time. So if it's exactly the same, or even if it's exactly the same except for the amounts, easy way to copy those through. So you don't have to just manually enter things every time. And there's another scenario that's related to purchasing. So for companies that are using purchase orders, whether it be for inventory or for just expenses, if you're using purchase orders, you can pull that data, or it's kind of a two way to do it. You could push the purchase invoices from a PO, like post from the PO. That's some people's process. But even if you're doing like, let's say a three-way match type scenario, what's on the right says get from PO receipts. That means I start to do a purchase invoice, but really I'm trying to match an invoice that came in to a purchase order and receiving function that happened. And I want those to pull the data over. So that eliminates rekeying, and it does some validation between those and lets you pull them through. So that's kind of another way to say, go and get the invoices that have a receipt on, or the purchase orders that have a receipt on them, so I can do a three-way match. And they're going to, not only is it going to speed up your process, but that's obviously another accounting control that you want to put in place. Okay, so let me, this is an invoice. I'm going to go ahead and flip back over to BC then, because this is an invoice that's got started. It's got some distributions on it. So it'd be a good place to go back and look. So I'm going to go out in, I've been using different shortcuts here. Depends on where you're at. I'm going to go out this one. I should have a shortcut and I don't, or have one yet. Let me put it, there's some bookmarks. And again, this is kind of basic navigation that we're kind of assume that you know most of this, but you obviously want to have these at your ready to be able to click on. But I'm going to pull one up that I did. We'll pretend like we're going through the new, right? So if I had clicked new, I would have selected the vendor. A lot of this information populates. There's some critical date information, particularly from a financial accounting point of view. Posting date is the date that goes to the general ledger. Document date is typically on my invoice. It's got a doc date. The doc date looks at the payment terms, gives you a due date. So those are important pieces of information. The vendor invoice number, that's being validated, so you don't have duplicate invoice payments by the system. That's one that's going to be critical before I can post. So that's kind of basic information that gets pulled in. When I click that vendor, of course, in this bottom section, the invoice details, it has other relevant information that came from the vendor. There's not too much on this one, but like the payment terms is on there. Payment method could be on there. There's different information that's going to come in. You can override that, assuming that your security allows it, but those are things that are going to inherit, right? The important part here is what does it look like on a purchase invoice line? And so you can have the detail can be, in this particular case, there's a couple of inventory items, but if you see on this GL account, I started to enter a GL account, didn't finish that yet. So this row is to say, let's just say it's some type of expense that I'm keying on an invoice. I'm going to go in, I'm going to enter the expense so I can just either key the account number if I know it, or I can go in and in this case, I'm just going to type in the word expense. It should find stuff for you. That's the way BC would search for it. It's going to go out here and it's going to pick it up. I'm not really going to get into the concept of dimensions, but some people have departments as a kind of a relationship to the account as a dimension, and some people have projects and other things, right? But the primary point here is that I've got information here that's flowing through that I need to put my distributions on the lines. If I had, let's say I want to have a breakdown, and we will use that company as an example. You get multiple lines on the chart. I'm going to use my shortcut key F8. I'm going to copy that. Get a little warning up here from my setup, but I'm going to go ahead and we'll bypass that for now. But the distinction I want to make here is you can see how I may be having an invoice that I'm splitting between two different entities or two different company codes. And so that's a way to split them. Another thing that I think is just kind of a shortcut thing I like to use sometimes. Let's say the invoice came through and I'm going to split it between the two companies and it's some odd amount, like let's say it's $2,354.12. I'm going to split it. I can do divided by 2. So this is kind of a nice little, it does a little bit of math. You can't do tons of math, but you can do something like that. It does the split for me. Then I can copy it above. So it's a little kind of a cheater shortcut thing there. Couple of little things that can save you some time. And you notice this middle row, it's got a comment, right, about what did I do here. This one got brought over because it was a 3-way match scenario. That's why this information came in. But you could have your own comments on here that you can bring in. And I'll just put in, here's a comment, right? So you have comments you can bring in. That gets you the core part of it. On the attachment side, anything you can browse out to, like here I could browse. I can bring those in. They'll come in either to BC and or to OneDrive, depending on how your system is set up. So you can have multiple attachments. They'll stay with the system downstream when you get to the payment process and other things. People need to do research. And you can also add notes in a couple of different ways. This is a place to an internal note. Of course, this is really all internal because it's purchasing, but you can have notes here. You can have other comment lines. So there's plenty of places to get data in here that can be helpful for accounting review and approval before you go forward. Okay, the posting part of this, before you post, we're going to get to the point of posting. Oh, the poll just came in. So I'm going to go in and, yep, I see the poll coming through. This is kind of good timing. We just talked about the purchase invoice right here. So I'm going to go ahead and answer that. So if you could answer that for us, please. That came up. So on the posting part, there's an important step here to do a preview first. And the preview, what it's doing is making sure all my settings are valid, my dates are valid. A lot of things are going to tell you there's a problem before you run this, but depending on your situation, especially with new people, I recommend running this to go through the process so that you can see how things work. It's basically telling you, since it came up with no error messages, that we're good, but then no error messages, but maybe I want to know, well, what's the GL side of this? I entered some GL numbers, but then there were a couple of lines that had item numbers, and there could be other scenarios, right? So this is telling you what's the debit and credit scenario going to be for this. So that could be important to know. And then the rest of this may or may not be applicable, but as you know, behind the scenes, we're hitting the vendor subledger. We call it a vendor item ledger. So there's ledger data, details that are getting into your subledger for the payables purchasing process is coming into the system. So depending on what you're touching, it's just telling you what's going to happen, right? So that can be important to know. And then the show related entries can be important to know, particularly later when you're trying to find things and where did everything happen. Okay. If you're all good, you can post from here. I'm not going to post it. I'm going to give you some options, right? You can post from here. A lot of people post as they go. I know some systems you post in batch, maybe more legacy systems, but you can post as you go or you can post in the batch. If you'd want to post in a batch, then you can use this screen and selectively choose these or just kind of choose all of them or kind of go through and use the post batch function. The preview is still available to you, but you can go that route. So, and this assumes you don't have workflow and things, right? If you had workflow turned on, you would need to get approval first, and then only things that would go through approved would be able to post. And if there were, let's say you did not run your preview posting first, but you ran into a problem, the good things will post, the bad ones will not. But obviously you want to, recommended that you kind of get those things sorted out before you go through the posting process. Okay, let me flick back over to our deck and make sure I've covered most of these. Oops, sorry about that. That's the wrong one. Well, I lost my screen, my presentation. I'll just jump back over to the correct mode here. Sorry about that. Jumping ahead, sorry. I think we got all of these. Okay, good. Yeah, back down here. Yeah, we got through all of this. One thing I did not mention. I'll just mention it. The get recurring lines. It's another version of being able to automate a little bit. You can, for vendors, set up some default. I always kind of code to these accounts. So, like if it's some type of travel expense or something else, and I've got a few different account numbers that I always use: travel, airfare, et cetera, blah blah blah. Those could be preset on the vendor so that they come in automatic. There's some settings for that. So it's kind of a more advanced function, but I want to mention that. So it's a time saver. All right, so let's jump down to where our next point was. Yeah, that was the get lines. Here we go. Purchase credit memos. This won't take us too long because it's very similar, although there are a few options. So similar to the purchase invoice side, you can manually go in, create a credit memo and say, this is what I want to credit to the vendor, right? Usually we're offsetting an invoice of some type that might be open, or maybe there's something that's happened and we need to do a credit and they have a credit balance, or we have a credit balance with them. Whatever the scenario is, sometimes you just start and you just enter those directly. So there's the manual option. It works the same. The screen's almost identical to the purchase invoice as far as getting them in there, getting the account distribution, that type of thing. So that's the first way to look at this. Maximize this a little bit. And then there's the aspect of how do I want to apply those to invoices, right? So it's very common that we apply, and I'll show you this in the real screen here in just a minute. But you've entered a credit, right? And now you want to apply it. So you can apply it before you post it. There is a scenario where you could enter it and apply it later. I'm not going to show you that in this session, but you could do that later if there was a reason you didn't know at this point. You just need to get it in. At this point, though, let's pretend I know. I go into an apply window and I see a list of invoices for that vendor, and I can apply those either in whole, partial, whatever I want to do. And it's a matching up of those. So that's very common to need to do that. One thing to note, that assumes, for example, that invoice is not paid, right? So there's some restrictions on the status of those invoices. Assume those invoices are open. Okay. Another method for creating purchase credit memos, which could be a faster method, is you just like on the invoices, you could copy. In this case, you might copy the invoice, but create a credit. So it just kind of creates a credit memo, the reverse, so to speak. It pulls all the data in for you. So that could be a time saver. It also helps you be more accurate if you literally just need to reverse out what happened. Those lines also, the get posted lines is another way to say, look at a document, like look at an invoice, look at a purchase order, look at something else and pull lines in. But the most common way if you're doing this is say copy the invoice if you're going to try to key one from scratch. Okay, and this just kind of just shows if you're doing it from the lines to how to grab the lines. This is showing if I copy from a invoice, you see all these different options. Like there's a lot of other documents you could be copying from. I mean, really, we're going to be copying most likely from a posted invoice. Okay. And then you can go through the process of just like on the other, you can go through what all the details are good, and maybe you've done an application to the invoice, you can post these. So it's very similar, very almost identical to the invoice process as far as this part goes. Okay, now here's a part that gets a little more complex. I'm going to just show the explanations of this. I'm not going to process the examples, but obviously it'd be a lot more convenient most of the time to say, well, I've got an invoice, I just need to correct it, cancel it, reverse it, void it. There are a lot of different terminologies that are used. Business Central has 3 different methods you can see listed here that have meet different criteria or different scenarios on how you want to create a credit memo from an invoice. Again, there's some prerequisites here in that the purchase invoice has to be in a state that allows this, right? It can't have been paid yet. And there'd be steps we would need to take if we had paid it on how could we get it back to a point where we could do this. But these are some scenarios. And this would be kind of more of a takeaway, and I won't read these through to you, but it's basically some scenarios where it kind of does it automatically, or it kind of gets it back into a state where it's done a reversal and is ready for you to take a live credit memo and work through the process. So there's some different scenarios that would if they fit for you, speed up the process, make it more consistent that you go through. So again, I'm not going to go through the details, a little bit more advanced on ways to do it, but it does save time as long as your scenario fits. Okay, let's get into the payment processing. So there's what we call a payment journal, and so some systems, it's like a payment batch or something else like that. But again, like everything, I could manually enter these payments, like select what I'm going to pay and select the invoices and all that detail. I can quote unquote prepare them, which I'll show you this process, how to prepare these. That means let the system build that for you. And then I want to mention electronic payments and then of course spring posting, all those things. So we'll go through here. Let me do this one in the let me go over and do this one in the live system. There was my other screen. I think I lost. There we go. Go back to this. So we're going to go back into the regular system here and go to a payment journal. I may have one out there that I was working on yesterday. Let's see if we can clear something. Yeah, I meant to reset this for us. I'm going to clear this off. And this maybe is a good example just to know, this hasn't been posted yet. I haven't printed the checks yet. I'm still in kind of a very much in an edit mode that I can do. So I'm going to mark these, and for purposes of our little session here, I'm going to clear what's on there. Okay, this kind of resets this. So there's some batch settings, but the primary function we're doing here is if we're going to do this kind of manually, you're going to do this from scratch. I want to manually build this up and select what I want to pay. Well, that line here on this payment journal line, it's a vendor type, and I'm going to pick the vendor. So if I click on this account number, there's not a GL account in this case. In this case, it's the vendor is the type. It's a vendor. So I could put my number or name. I could say I'm going to selectively go in and I want to pay something on there. So I'm going to go over here and 2 ways to do it. I could put an amount, but you can actually, it's a little easier to me, let the system go in and build this up for you. So different ways to handle this. But on the screen here, home screen, there's an apply entries. So this says, okay, here's what's out there for that vendor. There's some invoices that are out there that haven't been paid yet. I can just say I wanted to pay, okay, we're going to pay these 2. You mark them, and there's a little button here that says set applies to. It picks them up. This column right here went from amount to apply. It added some fields here. It was 0. It went to that amount. But let's say, okay, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pay $1,000 of that. So I'm putting 1,000. I put the minus in. You probably know this already. It's just a little different than some systems, just because of the way we're quote unquote reducing the payables that we owe. It's a negative amount. Some systems don't see it that way, but that's why there's a negative there. But I can partially handle these, or if I decide to, I could pay something that didn't, that maybe that's an invoice there. There's other ones I could pick. Obviously, I'm not doing anything with that payment, but this is a way to manually say, I'm going to build this up. There's some more advanced things that could happen if you were doing payment terms or discounts and things like that, but let's just go with this. So you can see I've selected 4560 in total. It populates that for us. I may have to go in and out of that to build it up, but then, I could go to the next vendor, right, and build this up. Now, for purposes of just kind of, okay, what's the faster way to do this? if your system is set up and your vendors have their payment terms, their payment methods, everything's kind of, been entering all my invoices in a way that all of the kind of underlying data is there for me, that'll allow me to speed up this process. I can go in and use this prepare, and I can suggest vendor payments. Well, this brings up a screen that has some details on it. Once you kind of start using it, it does memorize kind of what were your settings. I'll open this up, and I have this in the document too that shows this. There's a few critical ones in here, like it's very common, right, to summarize per vendor because I don't want multiple payments going to the vendor. There's a cutoff date. I want to pick up everything through a certain date. When does it hit the financials? There could be some scenarios depending on month end close where that could be different. What bank account am I using? Is it checks? Is it electronic? Those kind of things. And this is a part where if you wanted different payment terms, let's say you're doing, or payment methods, let's say you're doing electronic and you want to segregate that from checks. You could filter this and it'll build this for you. Or you could say, I want the high priority vendors. Maybe the vendors have something on them that we can use. You might notice this filter here, there's additional fields. So if there's an attribute or an aspect that helps us filter this better, we can do that. All of that, the point of all of that is that we can come in here and we can say, this is what I want to pay. And it's going to look at the data and it's going to go, okay, here's what I think you should pay. So it's just added some lines, right? Now, apparently I didn't have everything set up correctly. So I didn't have my payment method, but it should pick most of these things up. Again, you can still work in this. This is still live. If I need to go in and go, oh, no, I'm not going to pay that full amount here. Let's go back and look at that apply entry section. And I can go out, and that happened to be just one invoice, one big invoice for some reason, but you can selectively control that, partial pay it, remove it. Even then, if it said, you know what, no, let's just take this off the list, delete these, right? So think of this as a way to kind of go out and manage all that, get everything ready. I'm not going to go through any kind of approval, but you can see there's an approval here. But one thing I do recommend is there's a prepayment journal, and there's different journals, different ways to look this. I'm going to look at this one on the screen. A lot of times this when we send it to Excel, so when someone else can review or approve it, I'm going to preview in this case, so we'll just get a screen print. Make this a little bit bigger here. So this is kind of an old school report, but I like it because it tells me the vendor, it tells me the invoices are going to be paid, it tells me the total, kind of lists it all out. So just basically saying, here's what's going to happen. Here's the total that's going to go out of your, right there. There's the total that's going to come out of the GL, out of the bank account. So it gives you that data. There's a couple of other ways, a couple of other reports and things to look at, but I like this one just in that it gives me the details. And maybe I do send this off for somebody to approve, even if it's not a formal approval in the system, that they've done that, right? So you can do that, go through that process. I mentioned earlier, if there were information on these, let me drill in again just one more time on this apply. When I get in here to the line level, this invoice level, when I mentioned things like having attachments and having notes and things like that earlier, there's a mechanism here to go back and see the underlying document, right? So this is a drill back to the invoice that we're going to pay. If there were attachments or other information, this could be useful. So if you do have a reviewer, an approver that's coming through and they get into the system, they could drill back in here, kind of in and out and see what's happening, and get that data while you're kind of still working on the payment run. Okay, so that kind of gets you to the point there. We can print these. I'm not going to go through the printing process here, but there's printing. If we have printer jams, still happens sometimes, selectively void one or more or void all of them. You can go through that process. If this were electronic payments, then there's processes here. There's an export. So there's different steps you go through to create the EFT file, create the EFT remittance, email the remittance. There's different steps that you go through, of course, if it is a payment, an electronic payment. But you go through that, whether it's checks or electronic, right? You're getting to the point where everything's been kind of finalized, and then I can post. You can't post, obviously, until you've generated the EFT or you have printed your checks, right? You want the don't want something trying to post that hasn't really printed and created check numbers and all those things. One note about the voiding side of it, if I did go in and void these, this is voiding from kind of like a printing, sort of a printing in process or kind of a journal in process. If you print this and posted it, there's another place in the system that does kind of a financial void, and it's in the check ledger. So there's a check ledger that says, oh, I posted all of this. There's some other options. It's a little bit more advanced. I'm not going to go through here, but it does come up, right? It's like, oh, we sent this out, went to the wrong place, cancel it, whatever reason. They didn't clear the bank. There's a different process for that to go through from the bank side, clear it as a check. And then you have options on what do I do now? Is it still a good invoice? Do I redo it? What do I do? So that's a little bit different preview or process that happens. Okay. Anything else on this one? I think I'm hitting the basics here. Let me just check my notes. Let's go back to our list. Yeah. Okay. It's got us through. Scroll through here to catch us up real quick. Payment journals. Okay. Yeah, this is where I mentioned the selecting what we're going to pay and then just showing the details of how things get applied and selected. Yeah, let's just kind of get through here. This is our preparing our payment process. There's some recommendations. Yep, mentioning that we can cover electronic separately. Yeah, printing these. This is the journal. This is an Excel version of that same report that I ran earlier. In case you want to go to Excel. Printing and voiding, we talked about all that. Okay, before we get into the inquiry, one other thing to mention on the payment side is you can email a payment remittance even if you're doing checks. And so a few customers do this. Not everybody does this, but I think there is some value in that. Even if I know it's not coming electronically, there's some kind of value to say the check is in the mail, so to speak. The check is in your email to kind of say it's like a heads up to saying this is what's going to be paid. So just know that in the email setup that we can do, it can email a remittance version, even though the check might be physically going in the mail. So it's not just limited to electronic payments. So we have some scenarios where we want to actually email a remittance, even though it was not electronic. Okay, so inquiry and reporting. We'll just hit some of this and some of the reports and things. I mentioned, of course, there's a subledger behind this. So I'm going to show how the subledger, kind of the details of this work, a lot of the drill down, some reports. We'll skip through these, and then we'll do it live in the system. There's an aging report. Let's see here. There's a Power BI report. Okay, so let's go back over and look at the real system. I'm just going to hit some highlights here on these. Okay, so let me go back to the payment journal part. All right, so on the ledgers, I'm going to do this two ways. I'm going to start from a vendor list right here, right? So on the vendor list, we have the kind of the open balances here and the payments that have been made. So there's different views you can have on this, but in my view, I've got the vendors here. Anywhere it says like there's zero right here, obviously that means there's no balance due, there's nothing open. This one's got some payments. These never had any payments. Just as a reminder on this screen, you can filter either by this funnel up in the upper, it opens up the left side. The funnel will let you filter by whatever fields you want, right? So if I'm filtering by the amounts or dates or anything like that, I can go in and do that filtering. Or I can go in, and this is what I like to do sometimes, is on the balance due, let's say, these individual columns, you can either filter to the value, which is more important, like I'm filtered to a certain vendor. But let's say I'm filtering on the balance due and I want to do greater than zero. Right. So then that's just a quick greater than zero kind of list that I have on this balance due. And I may or may not have already saved this setting like this. I'm going to say open AP. Greater than zero, right? So that's just a quick, I got a list view right here. So you can imagine there's all these different fields available to you. to go in and do a list view of these and see what happens. Let me open that, clear that off. So that's important to know. And then when it gets into the, say, the vendor ledger entries, I'm going to go in, and when I click on that amount, it's pre-filtered to the vendor that I'm on. Right? It's pre-filtered also because it knew that there is a balance due. So it's got, it's basically open list. So there can be scenarios where I see everything or I see just whatever is due, but this is the vendor ledger entries for that vendor, right? So it could be whatever's happened with everything that's ever happened with this vendor transactionally is listed on this page. And then of course you can continue your filtering of what type of document, etc. An important and helpful function here is called find entries. This is important for research or, what's the debit and credit behind this? What's the detail behind this? There's a nice shortcut here about show document. So I can get straight to the underlying invoice on here if I want to. But if I just want to know what are the relationships, what happened on this thing, I'm going to hit the find entries button. And this shows me, okay, there was the original purchase invoice I could look at. Here's the GL. I'll just use the GL as an example on this one. So this is all the debits and credits that were related to that purchase invoice. And you can see the account number on here. I like to sort this myself just in account number order. But yeah, you see the payables, you see the expenses, things that happened on here, some costing and different things that went on. That's good to see. Again, you can continue to drill depending on what you're trying to do, but the GL aspect of it is important. That's being picked up in the ledger, right? And again, if there had been, as you're drilling in, like we did show document, there had been attachments and other things, like this one's got a couple of attachments, they'd be available to you. Okay, so that's one important view from the vendor's aspect. You can get to that vendor ledger from a lot of different places. What page shows all? Okay, yeah, there's a poll that just came up. Can I answer that? All right, so we'll move on here. Let me show you though a little bit more higher level view of this. Right, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to just look up. I'm going to use the tell me. Some people call this the search or tell me is a common way. Actually, that's what they started using now. That's good. Tell me function. Okay, so we're going to say vendor ledger entries. Again, I probably have a shortcut for this, but I just want to show you when you're searching for this, that tell me has, hey, what's on my page? What are some other things I could do? Here's what I'm looking for, and I'm going to bookmark it as my vendor ledger entries. Screen, the same screen we were on earlier, but this time it's not filtered to that one vendor. What I want to talk about here is kind of a newer function, is the analysis. And so this analysis, it's a little button on here. The analysis mode, initially it takes the data. You can see I've done one of these before. I have some grouping that I did, which is by company, by type. Let me get a clean view of this. So I'm going to click a new analysis. I just want to show you, this is really like the original raw data we were just looking at, just in a little bit different format. So it's a screen, it's a view that, looks kind of like a pivot table. It's not exactly a pivot table, even though it's a pivot mode, but it's not exactly the same as an Excel pivot table, but it's a very similar concepts in that fields that I want or don't want, like let's say I don't care about the dimensions here, these company code, unclick these little boxes. So this is very much like just normal things we're used to with pivot tables. To go in and group these, you can drag and drop into your values section, your group section. So you can, your skill set, if you have it with a little bit of Excel pivots, is going to help you here. Like the currency, I'm going to get rid of the currency. It's not even, let's see, where's that currency at? I could search too. The currency. There's currency. Let's hide that. Hiding a couple of them. But what you can do with this is now, let's say, again, as a simple example, I'm going to group this by vendor. So there's some options here to say group by vendor, other things you can do, but let's just make it simple. Group by vendor. Now I got a vendor and I can see, it's group by vendor. I could group further, like if I want to group by vendor and then group by payment type, document type. That's really going to be, so I've got some invoices, I got some payments. You can see the concept is just some grouping, right? You can still drill into these things. If I click on any green text like that, I'm going to be able to drill back. It's taking a second. Click on one of these. There it goes. Drill back to this entry and do the find entry. So it's always going to be drilled down. What I recommend is if you're in the mode of having to work with this kind of data, this raw data, and then export something raw out to Excel, which, as you know, a lot of screens we can go out to Excel. from. That's fine. That's great. But if you're doing this repetitive work of export to Excel and then doing a lot of grouping, cleanup, etc., try to think of ways you could shortcut that process by pre-setting it. So in my case, I did a group by vendor and then by document type. So in this view, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to say by vendor by dot type. If this saves me time where down the road, I don't want to have to do this every time in Excel, I can still take this data and I can export it, right? So I can still get this out to Excel. But now I've done it in a way where it's grouped better. It's in a way that's going to save me time, especially if I'm doing repetitive work. So that's the main idea is not to have to go through and do this repetitive type work. And you might have a lot of scenarios too, right? So I have two now, but at any point I want, click on this tab and I can go in and set some type of different grouping and they're ready to go, right? And each time they're ready to go Excel. Now, if I want to go back to the other view, the regular view, I can always toggle back over to the regular view so that can get us back there. I mentioned at the beginning, there's some Copilot that can help you with this. I don't use this much yet because I'm typically faster at creating my grouping and lists than Copilot is, but I can see a day where this is going to get really fast or like I can just, especially if I can say it. But right now I could go in and type some fields that I want, or I can have some prompts help me decide how do I want to do this. And when you do that method, it'll help you build the query. You can still refine it, but as you know, Copilot and AI, they're trying to find ways to speed it up for you, to group it for you. Some are more useful than others. Like I say, I like this as an introductory point of view, but if you've used the system much, you'll probably be faster than Copilot. But the day's going to come where you're going to tell it what you want, and it's going to build this list for you. That probably isn't that far into the future. Okay, so that's that view. Let me toggle back over to this is a reminder, it's all based on, it's really the same data, same view. If you really prefer this one, go out to Excel, remembering that you can still put filters and queries on this and get lists the way that you want. So that's still going to be available to you. Okay, I think we're good on that. Let me flip over that. We're going to show the report too. Let me just make sure that was the right ones. Get down to the end. Okay, yeah, we're going to hit let's hit the AP aging report and just kind of show you the report list. I'm not going to go through all the reports. Obviously, there's quite a few different ways to get them. Again, if you're searching, you're going to see a way to search for it, but I'm going to show you the report list too. So let's say I'm doing age accounts payable. So there's ways to search that. I can see that that's here in a report that's available. So I could run that. You hit the age one. This one is where, like other screens, okay, there's parameters, right? Now, if you just want to run it wide open, you just want everything, then you probably just go with this. It's got my detail. Most of the time we want detail. If you want it summary, here you go. If you want to go direct to Excel, you can do that. There's a few other options about, well, I want raw data and things. And I personally think the vendor ledger is better than this raw data report, but there could be a use case for that. Oops, sorry. Lost it. Let me get back to the clicking and it's nothing happening. Let me just click on that again. And I have a screenshot of this too, in case that doesn't come up. All right, even though I misspelled it, it found it. All right, so I'm going to run this to the screen again, although I like, a lot of times go into Excel, but just for this purpose, we'll see it quickly on the screen, really small. But it's your typical aging report, right? Fits your aging buckets and things like that, and age by due date or age by other, invoice date, other ways you can do this. Nothing special here, but that's a very common report that we run, right? Other reports, you're going to have it in the list and on the deck. We have the reports here listed in the finance section. There's a number of reports. There's your aging. There's some 1099. There's other details. A lot of this, again, is I always recommend start with what you can see in a ledger entry or the list view or analysis view and kind of go from there. But there's a lot of other reports that could come up. But these are the ones that are basic view of those reports. Okay. And then there is, and I just have a screenshot of this again on the the other view. Let me jump back over. Yeah, this will be the last one here on this view. So you may or may not, your company may or may not have the Power BI app turned on. There is a native app that has, it's part of the finance app for Power BI, but it has some aging, some payables data. There's some other apps that have purchasing data. So that's available out here. Sam, did we get the quiz popped up yet?
Yes, the quiz is popping up right
Okay,
now for
great.
everyone. We have 3 quiz questions that we're submitting. And we will also follow up after this webinar pertaining to the CPE accreditation with certificates of completion to send to everyone that's attended. So we really appreciate everyone's time this afternoon.
Sam, I got one prompt. Oh, here we go. Thank you. More coming automatically. That's great. Everyone should get, which should be, once you're done through this, there should have been 3 that came up for you, 3 prompts.
The third and final quiz question should have been submitted through.
We do have a couple of minutes left. Were there any questions that came up?
Let's see, I'm looking through. I don't see that there's been any posts for questions. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to submit them now. Oh, we do have one.
Sure.
Let's see. Does Center offer any other Business Central trainings?
So yes, we do other training. So we have some training that is for existing customers that is part of the monthly training that we're going to be doing, but we are going to be doing either personalized one-on-one training or like this webinar, we're going to be doing other CPE webinars for other modules of BC. And so our goal is going to be to do one a month. We're not 100% sure if that's going to happen yet, but that's the goal. So be on the lookout for that. But of course, we can do other training like this. And I know this was very quick and very introductory on some of those areas. We could get into more advanced topics too, but we are going to try to, over the year, cover your basic modules.
Great, thank you, Steve. And yes, we certainly would be able to reach out and share about other possibilities for any customized training sessions. And another question came in, do we handle acquisitions?
If that, I'll have to interpret that question, but if that is related to like if your company buys another company and needs to bring in data and things, we do a lot of that, and as in the market, as you can imagine, that's happening. Yes, great. So that's pretty common. As you may or may not know, there's tools in BC to load data from another system, through Excel and things. So absolutely, we have all of that available to do those. And yes, config pack exactly is the normal method depending on the source. But and we have a lot of experience doing that. It comes up very frequently.
Perfect. Unless we see any other questions come through, again, we appreciate everyone's time. We'll send out the certificate of completion for the CPE credit and be in touch as a resource so that if any other questions come up, you have our contact information and we'll be happy to assist in any way. And we
All right. Thank you,
have
everybody.
a hi, Kim from Marcia. I believe someone knows Kim.
Yeah, great.
Allie also posted our upcoming events, and as a recap from Steve, we'll be producing these on a monthly basis going forward. Thanks again, everyone.
We'll send this deck out with the certificates too. So just as a point of reference for you. So thanks for your attention. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.